7 days out until Election Day is the time we're recording this on Tuesday, October 29th. Can you talk to us about if you're feeling any sense of deja vu? You've been here a few times before, tight poll numbers, everyone thinks it's a tight race. What are your thoughts going into this final week?
I mean, it is a tight race, and we know that it's always going to be a tight race. We feel good about the situation that we're in today. We've got an amazing team walking doors every single day. We're obviously up on TV, getting our message out, making phone calls, text messages, doing all those things that we do to make sure voters are paying attention to the race and getting their ballots in as soon as possible. The response we've been getting is really positive, so we feel really good. As you can imagine, it's only as good as the ballots actually making it into the elections office and being counted. And so we're hopeful that our supporters are getting their ballots in as soon as possible and getting them counted.
What is the difference between running for a seat like you did against Rudy Salas last time in the midterms versus the general election? I imagine you just have more eyes on the election as a whole as people are voting for president as well.
Yeah, I assume there's going to be a higher turnout. I mean, when you look at the midterms, it wasn't as big of a turnout. We expect a larger turnout. Like every other presidential cycle, 2020 was a record turnout. I don't think we're on pace to surpass 2020 levels this cycle, but we're prepared if they do, and obviously we're trying to get as many voters out there.
And I know in the primaries, we can't go necessarily off of all this information, but if you combine your numbers with Chris Mathis, that would be over 50% as far as Republican voter turnout. It's, I think, somewhere close between 52 to 55%. I know that you can't count necessarily on those numbers, and you can't count on everyone voting from there over to your side. So I guess how do you get those voters that didn't vote for you, as it was kind of a split four-way race?
You know, it's just us making sure we get our message out. In the primary, we didn't spend a lot of money. We spent a little bit to make sure we were able to get across the line. But now, obviously, we've got folks out there walking precincts, and we're knocking on almost 2,000 doors a day. And we're really focusing on making sure voters get their ballots in, making sure the turnout model helps us. But also we're going after the Democrats and independents in the district. There's a lot of folks across the valley that are frustrated with what's going on in Washington, frustrated with what's going on in Sacramento. They see the difference in price of fuel from California to other states. They see the price of living, the price of houses, the price of electricity, the price of food. Everything's more expensive in California. And so making sure that voters, independents, Democrats, Republicans, all see that and recognize that my opponent was part of the state legislature for 10 years that really brought a lot of these problems on us and made us one of the most expensive states in the nation to live in.
He would argue, though, that he voted against the gas tax. He was voting against the interests of the Democratic Party for people here in Kern County. What's your response to that?
Well, we know that there was more than one vote. He likes to talk about one, and we know that there was over 30 votes, closer to 40 votes, and the fact that he voted once the right way, and that's all he wants to talk about, is exactly why there's a problem. There were more opportunities. Those opportunities presented themselves, and he decided to go against that. Pointing to one vote as if that's your success and that's the one time that you did the right thing, but failed on every other one. And then when you look at 450 missed votes, I mean, when you're paying someone to do their job, you're paying them to go up to the state legislature and actually vote for your interests. If you don't have the courage to actually push that button, what are you doing? What's the purpose of running for office? What's the purpose of representing your constituency? Then when you look at what's going on even right now, you've got the CARB right now doing a whole hearing in the next couple weeks that will potentially raise prices of fuel another 47 cents, another 50 cents. Where's his voice on that? When this governor was pushing a policy that we knew was going to raise prices, you had a Democrat governor from Arizona that thought it was important enough to voice her opinion because it was going to raise fuel prices in her state. And Governor Newsom pushed this special session, and there was no press release, no statement, no comments, no nothing. I mean, this is pretty much on par with what he does. He doesn't show up to vote, and when there's an opportunity to be a voice for the constituents here that he wants to represent, he never gets up and makes his voice heard and takes a position that would actually help people's lives be a little more affordable here in the Central Valley. And so pointing to one vote as if that's what you're going to hang your hat on and then fail on every other front, there's just not a lot to be said for that.
Can you talk about your efforts in working with a number of other California congressmen, specifically from the Republican Party, to try and fight back against CARB regulations, of course, the CARB vote that's coming out. And there's a number of other things from CARB that we've addressed over the years as well. Of course, the other one being the train regulation one that we know that you were here for, and we spoke with you about that at one point too. What are your thoughts if he could be that in Congress? Do you doubt that he can be that same voice that sides maybe across the aisle to reach out and say, okay, okay, this is not something that the state, or this is something that the state's doing that they shouldn't be?
Well, that's one of the things that we deal with in Washington in general, and in Sacramento. They put these unelected bureaucrats in power, and then in his situation doesn't even speak out in opposition to him. My frustration is we should be taking the power away from these folks, because they should not be making these types of decisions. They shouldn't be doing this behind the backs of the voters. And it's frustrating because people elect us to elected office to fight for them, to represent them, and to be their voices. And when we give our power away to these unelected bureaucrats like CARB, I mean, there's 16 people on that board, 12 of them are appointed by the governor and given the Senate approves them, and there's 4 more that get approved by the legislature, and then a couple environmental justice folks that get appointed to that as well. Those are all folks that are given power that aren't elected to have that power. And your elected representatives have to step up and make their voices heard. Yes, those are state, and I am at the federal level, but I can fight back on every level I can, making sure the EPA doesn't grant a waiver on the rail thing that you just mentioned in your question. That's something that's going to have an impact and raise prices on consumers, and it's one of those hidden costs that the consumer is going to feel. They're not going to know where it's coming from. And so my job as a federal legislator is try to prevent it from happening at the federal side, and continue to fight and make sure that the voters know this is going on, this is having an impact on their bottom line, it's having an impact on them being able to feed their families and buy clothing or drive their cars to work. And it's those types of things where you have to be a strong advocate for your community, and I think that's where I'm a big advocate for my community and continue to be a strong voice, and I think that's somewhere where my opponent would fail.
I know water and energy can be tough topics as far as working with the legislature in California, and specifically Governor Gavin Newsom, when it comes to trying to get some deal to increase water capacity, which I know that you like to see at Shasta Dam, or increase water outflow as well. Can you talk to us about permit regulation and things that you're doing in that regard that you think makes a difference to the best of your ability, I guess, to try and fight back?
So there are projects out there that Governor Newsom and myself agree on. I mean, Sites Reservoir is one of those. He has expressed and vocally supported that project. He's supported San Luis Reservoir expansion, which is another project that I support. Shasta is one of those that he does not support that I do. But the issue where we are different is the permitting reform. And that was one of the main reasons I voted against the infrastructure bill. That was my one of 2 asks. I wanted Shasta included, but I wanted permitting reform. That was the most important ask there. Because when we talk about projects like Sites Reservoir, that's been in the talks in the works for 60, 70 years. And we've never broken ground on that project. And it's all because of regulation. You've got projects like a 10-foot expansion of Success there in Tulare County. They only expanded an existing project by 10 feet, and it took over 30 years to go through the regulatory process. And that's just too long. And that's my frustration with these types of projects. If the state legislature really wants to get your project done, they exempt them from a lot of the environmental regs. They did that for the high-speed rail. They've done that for football stadiums for the NFL. But on a project that delivers water for our community, they do not cross those lines, and they won't help us. And so they claim to be supportive. They publicly support some of these projects, but how many times do they actually get out of their way and help with the regulatory process? And that's my frustration with a lot of these conversations is I feel like there's an opportunity for us to be honest about these projects, support the regulatory reform to allow them to be built, and help deliver for our community. And that's one of the main reasons I voted against that infrastructure bill, because it did not do that. And so it's politicians talking about money, but not actually delivering on a product.
Can you talk about the argument, the devil's advocate argument, and of course the argument that he makes, well, if you vote against the infrastructure bill, it means you're not voting for investments in our community. What's your response to that?
Well, look at the amount of money I've brought into the Central Valley, the projects that I've actually gotten done. We've gotten the Bryant Kern Canal. We brought in hundreds of millions of dollars for that. I brought in over $100 million in community project funding requests. I was just at a groundbreaking for a homeless shelter. We've helped with bridges crossing over the top of 99 in Tulare County, and new roads in Kings County. Police departments, working with them if it's dispatch centers or vehicles or body-worn cameras. We've helped with lots of different projects. I'm happy to help to support with projects where I can, but we want those projects to actually break ground. And so I'm very helpful where we can get that and where that opportunity is there. But when you talk about approving a bill with lots of money, you've got to make sure that money can actually get to the project and actually break ground and have an impact for the taxpayers that are paying for it.
I imagine that's been the argument I know from a lot of Republicans, which has been, that there's the spending that the government does, and you're fine with government spending, unless it's on something on a project that hasn't occurred yet, or just in the planning process. Is that kind of what you would fear if he were to go in to Congress, that he would be voting on approval of a lot of taxpayer dollars, with of course maybe not a lot of action happening?
No, I think there's always going to be projects that we'll both support. My frustration is on the specific to the regulatory side. I mean, take the housing side. When you buy a new house today, at least 25%, if not 33% of that house is just regulatory side. It's paperwork. And so that's a burden being borne by consumers. It's being borne by people who are trying to buy their first home. And those types of costs are also being pushed onto them through whatever infrastructure project they install. If it is a new reservoir, or if it's a new pipeline, or if it's a new road, or whatever it may be, those regulatory costs have a dramatic impact on everyday consumers. They just never see it. And even in their housing themselves, when they purchase that house, they know they're paying $300,000-$400,000 for a home. They don't realize that they're spending over $100,000 on paper. And that's something that the average consumer in Central Valley can't afford. And so those are the types of conversations we need to be honest with our voters about, and making sure they know that the people they're electing are fighting to make sure we can make their lives a little more affordable, a little more bearable, and help give them the opportunity to buy their dream home.
We have it in good authority too that your opponents, people who are backing your opponents, are spending a lot of money on some flyers as well that talk about your votes on former President Trump, specifically the impeachment vote, and not standing alongside him. What are your responses to seeing those mailers or seeing those ads that I imagine you've seen at this point in the mail?
I've seen something, but it's just the same old game that is played. It's someone who spending money, dirty politics, not being honest about what they're trying to do, and they're just trying to get Republicans to be mad at me. And it's a sad way to play instead of actually talking about what you can deliver or what you've done. Maybe they could run a few more mailers about his one positive vote versus his 38. Maybe he could explain the 37 or 38 that he failed on. I think that'd be a better angle for him. But it is what it is.
As you're trying to get this, this positive momentum going toward this last week, what are you doing? What is the campaign doing to just continue to knock on doors? I imagine, as we were talking about before, there's so many people that send in these mail-in ballots the second they get them because they're ready to be done with. How do you convince those people that maybe haven't gotten them yet, or are still waiting, on death's door, trying to figure out which one to do to make that final push?
What we like to do is get people to get their ballots in. We like to remind them that we'll continue to call and knock on their doors until they do. So we want to make sure we continue to be an aggressive campaign, and part of that is letting them know that as soon as their ballot gets checked off at the county, we leave you alone and we'll move on to the next voter that we need to make sure votes and gets their voice heard.